Dear listeners, welcome to another episode of our podcast. Today, our guest is Professor Olia Kanevskaia from University of Utrecht. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
I will start with a little confession and little apologies because we met with Olia during a Madrid conference, and I was surprised because she presented a topic of standardization in the European law, and I have to confess, this is something I was like, oh, this is going to be so boorish. This is something I think everybody, when somebody's talking about European law and European norm making and law making, everybody's, oh, this is the cucumbers and the light bulbs and everything else. And everybody are falling asleep. And then I found this very interesting topic, and I'm very happy that I have you here in our podcast.
Well, thanks again for having me. I'm happy to hear that not everybody finds the standards are very boring, technical, and that people don't fall asleep that easily when they hear about standards. So happy to talk about it.
So, does that happen to you often? That people are thinking that this is something really technical and very not interesting at all?
Unfortunately, yes, but I have to say, I think there has been some kind of a shift, not only in the legal community and legal academic community, but just generally in academia, in how the world views standards, that people sort of started realizing it's important, it's relevant. Standards are literally everywhere. I know it sounds like a very biased thing to say, but it is true. So yeah, it happens, but I'm always very happy to prove that it's actually not the case.
Maybe can you start with some examples, and maybe if you can explain on that why this issue is important for the European integration.
Right. So I'm going to be talking about technical standards, by the way, because I know for lawyers the word standards can mean all kind of very different things. So we're going to be talking about technical standards, requirements for size, measurements, connectivity, quality, and so on and so on. So you probably get already from there that it may sound a little bit boring, but it is not. Well, let's start with an example, for instance, of toys. I'm a mom of two toddlers by now, and I buy a lot of toys. I buy a lot of toys online. I buy a lot of pre-owned toys. And for me, as I'm sure for many other people who buy toys, other things, it's important that they're safe, right? It's important that when my children, I don't know, play with them, drop them, throw some water over them, do other things that children normally do, they don't fall apart. There will be no dangerous chemicals coming out of the toys, poisoning them. There will be no some choking hazard things. And it's important for me to know that they are safe. And I'm not a specialist in toy safety or in toys at all. I'm not producing them, I'm just buying them. But there are a bunch of people, actually a lot of people, who do know a lot about toy safety. And those people develop and set these standards for toy safety. So I know that I don't know anything about toy safety, but once I know that the toys comply with certain standards, I know they're safe and I would buy them for my children. And I mean, we can replace toy safety with pretty much everything, right? The safety of electronic devices, the environmental safety we can include there as well. And the story has a lot to do with European integration and with the process of European harmonization, actually, because for markets to be integrated, for the free flow of goods to happen, for the free trade to happen, we need to know that products that are produced in Germany, Malta, Belgium, Latvia, all other countries are also safe to be used and to be marketed in the Netherlands, where I'm from, or in Finland, or in any other country, in Czech Republic. So for that reason, I think this is one of the main reasons why standards are so important to talk about when we talk about European law, because they really support the process of European integration, of market integration, making sure that products that are marketed are safe, are of the quality that we want them to have, and that it's equal in all European member states.
Maybe if you present it from the point of view of the customers, so the standard of protection of the customers and I don't know children is the same within all toys produced within the European Union or imported to the European Union. But maybe I would add another topic that, for example, member states can create obstacles for trade when they set up their own rules. And by standardization, by European standardization, they cannot do that, or they can do it with. It's much harder actually to do that. So and they can by creating these obstacles, they can also support their own producers and reducing the competition.
Exactly. So there's exactly this danger of, let's say, protectionism, that member states will be pushing their own industry rather than wanting to harmonize technical requirements to benefit all the EU. And we have actually a requirement in the European standardization system that the moment there is a European standard, there cannot be national standard that is conflicting with that European standard, in principle, right? So there are always, as a EU lawyer, you know, there are always exemptions, there are always things that can be a sort of workaround solution, allowing states still to have some national measures that would go beyond the standards. It's not only a European phenomenon, actually. We also see it a lot in international trade, where standards also are very, very relevant. So also beyond the European Union, for instance, member states of the WTO can create trade obstacles, can adopt laws, measures that would prevent international trade, and that would allow them sort of to protect their own industry, to limit import from other countries. And sometimes countries have very valid reasons for that, right? Protection of health, protection of environment, protection of animals, but sometimes they don't. And it's very important for that reason that we also base all the laws that we have in member states on international standards when the standards exist. Unless, of course, there are certain circumstances that don't allow that.
Maybe because this is starting to be a bit theoretical. Maybe we can go more in the practice, because there is usually some idea that there is some wise man who is just deciding on which chemicals should be prohibited, which are still okay, and there is no wise man. There is something, and I will ask you, who is that? Who is deciding what is allowed, what is prohibited within the European system?
I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you a little bit, because it's still a wise man, or wise M as in plural, MEN. And those men and women are typically experts, and they know what they're doing. They're people who have been working in the industry. For toy safety, it would be toy industry. For standards on plastics, it will be plastic industry. And they come together in standard bodies. They sit around the table, they do some testing, they do some discussion, some deliberation, and in the end, they come up with what they believe is the best for the industry, what they believe meets all the criteria, meaning that it allows to produce a product that is safe, but it's also beneficial for other stakeholders, or it takes into account all other stakeholders. For instance, for toy safety, again, it would be consumers, children, parents of children. For environmental standards, it will be a lot of environmental concerns, of course, but also concerns of the industry. And those wise men, they create those standards.
So I can understand it, that it's something going from the bottom to the top. So it's self-regulating system within the European system.
Exactly, it's a bottom-up system. It's a private system. A lot of, I mean, there are also governmental actors, right, that come to standardization meetings, but mostly, and this is how it's established in the EU from a long time ago, we say that standardization is a private process. Standard bodies who create standards are private bodies.
But I could argue that people who are self-regulating themselves, they are not very willing to restrict themselves too much. So how the regulator is actually solving the problem of regulatory capture? So,
This is an excellent question because, of course, I mean, those people who create standards, they also have certain power, right? You're gonna create something which is gonna be decisive for market access, which is gonna be decisive for the product safety. So typically, governments would have certain requirements that they would impose. I think is a very hard word to say for it, that they would require standards organizations to follow. So they would require a certain level of openness, a certain level of transparency. They would require that standardization process doesn't exclude stakeholders. But an interesting thing is that it's then up to those standard bodies to see what these requirements actually mean for their very specific circumstances and for the very specific operational framework.
So basically, the state is. Can I put it that way, that the state is actually like threatening the industry, that the state says or the EU says, okay, you can regulate yourself, you can set the standards for yourself, but you have to follow certain rules. You have to be more inclusive. You need to, for example, you need to I don't know, put interest of the customer to more important position than it would be generally. If I imagine myself as a businessman, I would like to have as minimal standards as possible, unless I'm trying to eradicate any competition. So is it like that the state is asking the business, but unless they follow the rules, the state can go and regulate on its own, and it might be probably less worse for the industry than self-regulation with following these conditions.
I wouldn't necessarily say that it's threatening, although we do witness in the last couple of years there are changes in standardization landscape where in the European Union, but the European Commission is saying, well, if there are no standards in this field that we like, we will develop our own in certain fields. For instance, in artificial intelligence, the new AI Act, the recently adopted AI Act, allows for it. But there are certainly certain consequences that standards bodies will have to face if they don't follow these very wide principles. So, for instance, they can be declared that they provide a forum for collusion and potentially be in breach of antitrust law, for instance, if the processes are not sufficiently open and not sufficiently transparent, and so on and so on. Their standards might also, if they produce harmonized standards that support legislation of the European Union, the standards may not be approved by the European Commission to be used to demonstrate presumption of conformity with European legislation. So this is, for instance, what we see in a part, though, in the AI Act, and this is kind of a tool that the European Commission has in its toolbox to sort of, I wouldn't say necessarily curb or threaten, but to make sure that standards bodies know that, hey, there are certain things we want you to do.
And we are getting to the European Commission. What's the position of the European Commission, or are there another bodies than the Commission? Because there is plenty of agencies as well, which are dealing with standardization. And what I'm looking for the platform when the rules set up by the industry or agreed by the industry is becoming a law, which is very interesting from point of view of legal theory.
Right. So the European Commission has a very important position when it comes to standards. And just to clarify, there are some terminology. There are standards in general, and there are also harmonized standards. So harmonized standards are the ones that we use in the European legislation, that we use, to support European legislation. So European Commission would typically issue a request for 3 European standards bodies to develop a standard in support of legislation. For instance, again, coming back to the AI Act, the European Commission, I think, a couple of years ago, issued a request to SANSAN, like the European standards bodies, to develop a standard in support of the AI Act. And once the standard is developed, the European Commission will again look at it and approve it.
And this time said, okay, we need to do something more.
Yes, in a way. And then it will publish the reference to the standard and not the text of the standard itself. And this is very important. I will come back to it later. I know you also have a question about it.
Yeah.
So European Commission will publish the reference to the standard in the official journal of the European Union.
So we will have the normative act, I don't know, for example, regulation, which says, okay, if you want to do business in this area, you need to follow these rules, and that's it. So it's not like full text regulation setting up the norms, but it's just saying, okay, you need to follow your industry standards agreed by agreed and approved by the industry. More
often it will say you need to follow a harmonized standard, and then somewhere in the definitions it will say harmonized standard is a standard developed following the request of the European Commission by the three European standardization bodies. So sometimes in the new legislation like DSA, DMA, we sometimes also see references to other types of standards or international standards, for instance, but those are not harmonized standards. And the legal value, because they're then again not published in the official journal of European Union, the legal value or legal status of the standards may be different than the one of harmonized standards.
It might be also interesting because I know that a colleague of mine actually told me that EU is very often using the standards set up by the Council of Europe. And we are basically incorporated the Council of Europe's acts into the European legislation, which sounds weird, especially because at the end you can end up with we have 24 official languages of the European Union, but only some languages are used for the standards. What about the question of transparency when we cannot read in our native language the requirements we should follow?
This is $1 million question. When standards are not published, and I mean, if standards are law, which the court recently said they are, or recently confirmed that they are, the court has been saying it for the last 8 years. And if they should be available for free, and if they should be published, shouldn't they be published in all official languages? And it also creates a lot of work. Yes, and also for free. And it creates a lot of work, and we don't really know how to fund this.
I know that there is also a discussion in the Czech Republic about access to the standards, whether they should be for free or not, because it's the bureau which is setting them up is financed by selling the access to the standards.
Right.
And what actually the Court of Justice said, so the standards are supposed to be considered to be a law. And what else? Can we review them judicially?
Yes. So again, $1 million question. I mean, the court has been dealing with it for a while now, right? So there has been the James Elliott judgment in 2016, which was about the legal value of standards. Can the court review them? Can the court, is there a possibility for judicial review? There has been a bunch of cases in between, but perhaps the most interesting one is the recent case on the Public Resource Organization, which was about access to standards. And the rationale was exactly what you said, what's going on in Czech Republic. If standards are law, and if you should pay for access, does it make sense at all? And
Whether
how can we deal with it?
Whether it's in accordance with rule of law, because one of the preconditions of rule of law is that I have access to the required. I can learn what I'm supposed to do.
Exactly. I mean, if something binds you, you should know when you break the law and when you don't break the law, right? And if standards have the same value as law, that's exactly the question. So, and there is, I mean, it has been it was a very interesting decision, and there have been people who were reading different things into the decision. So some say, oh, the court only said about the access, it didn't say anything about free availability. Others said that, well, the court said about the access, but it also means that standards shouldn't be copyrighted, because that's also one piece of the puzzle, that standards bodies hold copyrights over the standards. That's why they are allowed to charge money for the access. So what the court said, apart from confirming the standards are indeed part of the European law, it said that standards should be freely accessible. Whether this means that all standards should be, as of tomorrow, put into public domain, or they should be freely accessible whenever interested party requested them, whether they are then automatically lose, or the standards bodies automatically lose copyright. So no, that remains the question, which now I think the European Commission, together with standards bodies, tries to figure out.
Is it possible? I'm wondering, because whether it helps that, for example, the standardization bodies would, I don't know, sell it to the European Commission, which would publish it.
That's one of the options that could be considered. I mean, in some European countries, so Czech Republic is not one of them, but I heard either France or Spain or both. So this is, don't quote me on that, but that the governments actually buy off standards from standards bodies and publish them, publish them on the internet, so they're freely accessible. So this is something which is possible.
To change the standards very often then.
Yeah. But then, of course, the question is, and the problem is, if standards should be ideally paced to technical development, right? So if you change them every year, then you also have to change the legislation every year. So whether this is a good option is another question, as well as whether since we're talking about harmonized European standards, whether the European Commission has the funding to do it.
And it's also like just paper chase. Whether
as well.
So whether it's actually improving the conditions on the market. Is it possible for me as an individual to take part in the process?
Surely. I'm not. I don't work for a standards body. I'm not going to be advertised as various options through which you can get involved. But European standards bodies, at least sounded like they are comprised of national standards bodies. So the best thing for you would be to go to your national standards body in Czech Republic and ask to be involved through them. And then it's the membership requirements of national standards bodies that apply. ETSI, so European Telecom Standards Institute, also has industry as members. So they kind of have this dual membership through national standards bodies on the one hand, and through the industry actors on the other hand. So if you work for a firm that wants to be involved in standardization, that is another possibility to get involved.
Because I'm wondering what's the difference between the involvement in the process of standardization and lobbying, because the line is very thin, I think.
It's true. And this is also kind of goes back to the question about power. How much power do you have as an expert? Perhaps the only one of a kind, or there are only few of that kind of experts who know that much about certain products to be able to actually write standards on them.
Mhm.
How much power do you have coming in the committee and deciding what will be a European standard?
Because I can imagine that people can have a lot of opinions about a lot of issues, and we discussed the toys. I remember because I've my own 11 months old, and I remember that my father-in-law actually asked me whether he should brought some children toys from Hong Kong, where he was traveling, and I said, okay, no, I want EU standards for my kids. But the question I wanted to ask is basically the accountability, because I can imagine that a lot of big industries can use their resources to take part in the process of standardization. While if I'm, for example, small or medium business, it's much harder to get involved because I will have a problem with my own business and not restoring resources to go and participate or lobby on the European level. And especially if I'm not I'm not involved in a standardization procedure within the national body, it might be very exclusive for just for the big players.
Exactly. And it has been an issue that has been raised multiple times
Mhm.
for a very long time now. How to include civil society organizations, consumers, environmental organizations, NGOs, who, as you say, don't have that much resources to just be, sending a lot of people to standardization committees.
Mhm.
While at the same time, when we look at big companies who sometimes have positions which are purely dedicated for people to go to standards bodies and participate in standardization projects, right?
Mhm.
So there's a huge power gap there. There is of course huge funding gap there, and it has been improving also since the last standardization strategy of 2022, where this was actually mentioned as one of the concerns by the European Commission. There have been attempts made to improve it. And Professor Ele Antonio from Maastricht University and Professor Volpato from currently University of Padua, used to be Maastricht University, they did a lot of research exactly on that, how to include civil society in standardization. Is civil society sufficiently included? And from my take on it, I think there are some good developments, but it's still not anywhere near from where we ideally want to be. And we want to be in a situation where everybody participates on an equal footing and everybody has the same chances to
Mhm.
contribute to standards development. And it may be like this now on paper, but it completely isn't in the reality.
Mhm. Mm, mm, I'm thinking about because we have two options how to regulate. One is this standardization procedure, which is used where industry is participating, maybe even the civil society is participating somehow. But on the other hand, I can go from through the, let's say, more classical approach when I send email to my representative in the European Parliament, and the European Parliament actually cannot decide to legislate, but it can be included in legislation which is discussed, and it might be more precise and less. It can be less dependent on the what the industry wants or what's the agreement in the industry. So, what do you think about this more traditional approach when the legislative bodies are actually legislating? They are not experts. They can be easily lobbied, but there is much stronger democratic legitimacy. And I can make example. I think everybody knows about one standard which was changed recently, and that's the connector for small electronic devices. Especially, it's I guess I can call it a Apple case,
Yeah,
when the lightning cables was reused, and that was decided by the legislative act, isn't it?
yeah.
So actually,
So
the lawmaking bodies decided to change it instead of the industry.
yes, because the industry took so long to agree on it,
Mhm.
and I mean, there have been in standardization industry. Let me put it this way: a lot
Mhm.
of companies were not really happy with that because standardization is typically a private process. We say it's a market-driven process, so a lot of companies, for obvious reasons, would rather have the market to decide to agree
Mhm.
on the unified standard rather than the parliament mandating it. But this is indeed one of the examples where we kind of knew, or we thought we knew, what is better for the consumer, for the environment, for everybody. We want to have that unified USB-C standard that would charge every device on the European single market. But it wasn't the case. Standardization bodies couldn't adopt it because there were a couple of very powerful companies, of which now one you just named, and predominantly this only company, to be honest, who were very much against it. So it went to the European Parliament, and now it's a mandated standard.
Mhm.
Also with its own caveats. I mean, there are still some ways how a company can go around it, but it's pretty much, it's pretty much in the law that if you want to sell a device in the European Union market, your device has have to be able uh, to be charged with the
Mhm.
USB-C connector.
And this is something which is called the Brussels effect, because if I'm not mistaken, the Apple decided that they will change the connector for the whole world, isn't it? So actually, the European regulation actually changed the policy worldwide. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point Apple decided that it would be so much easier for
mhm.
them to just, instead of making different phones to be marketed in Europe and then different phones to be marketed in the US and in China, that they will just stick to one adapter, which is fantastic, of course, for consumers. I'm an avid Apple user. I don't have a new iPhone, and I'm really struggling sometimes, when you don't have your charger with you, and you can't really charge it from your laptop, and you have to have, like, this bunch of chargers
Mhm.
every time you go anywhere. So from that point of view, it's a good development. The question is, why didn't it come from the market, and
Mhm.
is it good that the regulator intervened in this particular in this
Mhm.
particular way?
And also, it's causing that the regulation is not neutral, so it can actually block the development in hardware, etc. So we are actually cutting off some ways of industrial development or
Definitely,
research.
that's definitely one of the issues that a lot of companies have
Mhm.
with it. And shouldn't we just, let them compete and then choose a different standard? Or if the market says that, or if it appears from the market processes that different standards
Mhm.
are better for some reason, then let's all use three different standards, which goes completely, like, to the different direction that we want in standardization. But hey, we also say that market decides.
Mhm.
I
So
think most,
so
uh,
please.
yeah, the problem here was that it wasn't really the market deciding, but it was a very dominant actor who kind of precluded harmonization.
Mhm. Uh, I was thinking about whether I can put it that the private standardization procedure is championing the effectiveness of the regulation, while, for example, the regulator in, I don't know, European Parliament, European the Council, whoever, can champion different values. For example, the will of the people, or the environmental issues, which might be a little diminished by the industry. Or it's too extreme a claim?
I would say sometimes. I mean, I just keep thinking about the AI Act and how it will also require standardizing a lot of, well, fundamental values, fundamental rights, by means of harmonized standards. And what do we and what should we feel about, Apple, Samsungs, and other big companies of this world actually deciding on our fundamental values? And it's a big question, right? We trust the governments to do it. We think that the governments are better positioned when we talk about fundamental rights, human rights, but are they really? And this kind of also brings me to the question you asked about experts and legitimacy and accountability. There is the great book of David Kennedy about, it's called The World of Struggle, but it's actually about experts and the role of experts and the power of experts in also in governments. I mean, people will be people everywhere. So I think personally, I would say I'm not very comfortable with the thought that now Chinese, European, and US companies predominantly will be standardizing my fundamental rights. But then if you think about it more kind of with the David Kennedy's perspective and deeply, can we really trust the governments? But I think this is also a completely different question.
It's starting to be a little dark conversation, I guess.
Yes. It's very pessimistic.
But as you said, that there is new approach for standardization in the EU, and what we can expect in next years.
What we can expect is a lot of litigation, I'm afraid, which was caused by the court's decision in Public Resource Organization. Not only in European Union, by the way, but also at the national level. I would expect a lot of issues in, countries like Czech Republic, where you also have this question, shouldn't standards be accessible free of charge? Aren't they part of law? I would expect actually in a lot of member states, the same questions will arise. And also at the European level, the same questions will arise. There will be certainly a question more specifically about copyrights of European standards. There may be questions about at the national level about the liability of standard bodies, maybe liability of the European Commission, some other things that may arise in national law. At the same time, we will also see requests by the European Commission under the new legislation, right? The AI Act there already is a request to develop harmonized standards. There is a bunch of new acts that will be adopted soon. So the CHIPS Act, for instance, that kind of make the same reference to harmonized standards. And there it's interesting to see how it will play out. The AI regulation, in the requesting harmonized standards for AI regulation, the European Commission only directed requests to send Senelec, so two European standards bodies apart from three. So the ETSI was kind of excluded. And it's interesting to see whether this will be also happening in future or not. And of course, what you mentioned from governments interfering when they want to interfere or when they find that the standards that are being developed are not to their liking. I don't dare to say whether we will be seeing the increasing amount of governmental intervention, but maybe we will.
And also maybe you mentioned the NGOs may got a say bigger than so far. Thank you very much. And our guest was Olia Kanevskaia from Utrecht University, and see you soon, hopefully, with you, Olia. And dear listeners, we are looking forward to meet each other, at least in audio, next time. Cink, 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 dostali jste se na konec epizody a moc děkujeme za to, že jste nás poslouchali až do konce.
Určitě nám dejte like, určitě nás odebírejte a budeme se na vás těšit při příštím díle.
A pokud se vám díl líbil, pošlete nám zpětnou vazbu, pošlete nám to na e-mail z evropy@perfecuni.cz, pošlete to svým známým, hoďte si to do storíčka na Instagramu, cokoliv, budeme za to moc rádi, jak se to dostane co k největšímu množství lidí, které by to mohlo zajímat.
Děkujeme, mějte se hezky.